Sorry, it's July 3rd. There are fireworks going off, and I have no setup for doing this at all. So, yeah, happy 4th. Or not. What am I, a Republican? Anyway, this is episode 2, the McCreedy Bust. There's a lot to cover here, so get yourself a sarsaparilla and get comfortable. This episode is going to set up a ton of stuff that will hold for the duration of the series. But let's start with our facts first. The McCreedy Bust was directed once again by Gene Levitt, and I told you about him and his career in the first episode. This will be his final involvement with the series, so everybody say thank you, Mr. Levitt, for your contributions. If I had to guess, maybe he directed the first 2 to firmly establish a look and a tone, though the tone of the pilot is a tad different from the tone of the rest of the series, so I don't know for certain. The story was by Roy Huggins under his alias John Thomas James. He turned the story over to Sly Salkowitz, who wrote the teleplay. Now, Sly Salkowitz... Oh my god, really? Now, Sly Salkowitz only wrote this one episode for the show. Besides that, he was mainly a television writer who started way back in the 50s. And working in the area that he did, of course, he was familiar with westerns. He's got 6 episodes of The Virginian to his name, an episode of Rawhide, an episode of Wild Country, starring Earl Holliman, fun fact, and an episode of The Dakotas. Outside of the western genre, he wrote 9 episodes of Police Story and 35 for Ironside. He only has 1 directing credit, according to IMDb, a TV movie called And Then They Forgot God, which he also wrote. I'm guessing this had a fairly Christian bent to it, because according to the trivia, the movie was shown in churches. Of course, my dad once showed us an episode of The Simpsons in church, so what do I know? Salkowitz continued writing up until just a couple of years before he passed away in 1991. His last credit? A Columbo TV movie called The Grand Deceptions. I love to see it. The McCreedy Bust boasts a couple of very notable guest stars, too. We've got Burl Ives as the titular Big Mac McCreedy, and Cesar Romero as Ernesto Armendariz. Now, I have affection for Burl Ives for voicing Sam the Snowman in Rankin Bass's Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, which I've been watching every holiday season since, I don't know, birth, and I suspect I'm not alone in that. Aside from that beloved classic, he started his career in music in the 1940s. He recorded 30 albums for Decca and 12 for Columbia. He worked on Broadway and originated the role of Big Daddy in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, and he also got to play him in the film version. He won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor in 1958 for The Big Country, and sadly, he passed away on my birthday in 1995. Cowabummer. Cesar Romero was also a powerhouse in his day. I'm sure I don't need to tell any Batman fans or anyone with any knowledge of television history that he played the Joker in the 60s Adam West series. He famously did not shave his mustache and simply had the makeup painted right over it. What a power move. He was also very familiar with westerns. He did quite a few westerns in the 30s and the 40s. I won't bother listing them all, but I do want to shout out Frontier Marshal, a highly fictionalized version of the Wyatt Earp and OK Corral story that would later be remade into My Darling Clementine. He played Doc Holliday, though for whatever reason, this movie has his last name as Halliday, with an A. I have no idea what the point of that was. He's also my 3rd favorite actor to play Doc, followed by Val Kilmer and Tim Rozone. He did 55 episodes of Falcon Crest. I've never seen that, but I thought it was worth mentioning. Also guest starring in this episode is Edward Andrews as Peterson the banker. He also has a ton of work to his name, from an uncredited role in Adam's Rib, all the way to Gremlins only a year before his death. And finally we have Mills Watson as Blake. This guy. Cujo, Papillon, and most importantly to me, 4 episodes of the A-Team. Yeah. And with all that out of the way, let's get to it. Since this show was a mid-season replacement, they didn't have a ton of time between the pilot and the series proper. A lot of times, at least before streaming, pilots would be shot months before the actual show went to air, but this pilot was shot throughout October of 1970, and it aired January 5th, 1971. The McCreedy Bust was shot in early and mid-December of 1970, and aired January 21st, 1971. So things moved very quickly. The first staple of the show this episode sets up is the sneak peek opening, which I hate. Basically, they just play a scene or half a scene from the episode right at the beginning, and it doesn't happen every single episode, but it does happen in most of them. I don't know if they did it because the episodes ran short and they needed to fill some extra time, or if it was meant to entice the audience, but it sucks. To entice the audience, you could do a little tonight on X show, and then have a 30-second trailer before the credits. Plenty of shows did that. But this, it just seems pointless to show us a scene, which is usually not even the best scene in the episode, that we're gonna see in like 20 minutes. Anyway, after that we get our new opening credits, which will more or less remain untouched until Pete Duel's passing. The opening narration is done by Roger Davis, who will go on to play Hayes later. I'm not sure how he got this narration gig, but it does refer to Hayes and Curry as two latter-day Robin Hoods, which they were definitely not, since they kept the money for themselves. But apparently a lot of people hated the railroads back in the day, so maybe sticking it to them was enough to make them popular. Okay, I promise, the actual episode is starting now. We really open with Hayes and the kid at a saloon in Red Rock, which, according to this show, is the name of every other town in the West, waiting for a drink. Two men, Big Mac McCreedy, who practically owns the town, and a friend of his, Blake, enter and make themselves at home on the opposite side of the bar. The opposite end of the bar. The bartender serves them immediately, much to the boys' irritation. Literally just as the bartender is about to pour Hayes a drink, he stops and gives his full attention to Big Mac. But the kid isn't going to stand for that, and Blake isn't going to stand for the kid not standing for it. A lot of, dick swinging. It looks like the kid might back down, but then he asks Hayes how thirsty he is, and Hayes tells him he's very thirsty. It's kind of cute. Eventually, Blake draws and the kid draws faster. I love this. In the first episode, we saw Kid's accuracy, but this week we get to see his speed too. No one outdraws him, and he never misses what he aims for. He shoots the gun out of Blake's hand and blows away his holster. Big Mac gets a kick out of this and breaks the ice and pays for their drinks. Blake, on the other hand, runs off and literally tells on them to the sheriff because the kid embarrassed him. What an actual child. Big Mac and the boys get to talking, and he offers them $10,000 to steal back a bust of Caesar from across the border from a man named Ernesto Armendariz. They walk and talk about it, and they run back into Blake. They decide to make up with him, and they offer to get his holster fixed while they get him a drink. Blake tells him that Big Mac makes that offer to everyone, and that the bust is locked away in a safe on the Armendaro ranch. Hannibal has a Pavlovian response to the word safe, though you'd never know why watching up until this point. Blake makes the whole operation sound incredibly dangerous. But I do like that the guys are personable enough to actually go out of their way to make nice with him, and that he responds. He's not a problem the rest of this episode. Side note, Hannibal and his black hat and his smoky gray coat is the cutest thing in the entire world. I am besotted. What were we talking about? Right. So, they go back to Big Mac and negotiate for $20,000. Big Mac agrees, but only under the condition that they play poker with him and his rich friends when they get back so he has a chance to win it back. Both Hannibal and the kid are supremely confident that Hannibal can beat all of them. And this is the first time we hear anything about his gambling skills, which is another thing that now becomes an essential part of his character. They have a deal. The boys agree that this won't jeopardize their amnesty deal because recovering stolen property is legal. Okay, but how about the breaking and entering you have to do in order to recover said property? I guess because it's Mexico and outside of the U.S. authority, it's okay? So they go and they break into this supposedly huge and heavily guarded ranch, and they do it pretty easily. In Salkowitz's first draft, he added a whole bit about, like, a guard dog that they needed to get past, so they stole ether from a doctor's office, and then the kid puts on Armendariz's coat to confuse the scent, and then the kid nearly knocks himself out with the ether, and Huggins wisely nixed all of this. He cited that the boys were professional thieves and they would be better prepared for the situation. I agree with that, but my main problem with all of that is the fact that they steal ether from a doctor, and the point of the show is that they're trying very hard not to break the law anymore. Anyway, there's no dog in the finished episode. The scene of them breaking in is the sneak peek scene, so, been there, done that. And you guys aren't gonna believe what happens next. Hayes actually cracks the safe. I will now pause for your applause. I know, right? He actually succeeds in doing the thing that he's supposed to be an expert at. It's a miracle. 3 cheers for the McCreedy bust. The two of them are very tempted by all the money and jewelry that's in the safe, but they resist and they only take the bust. The amnesty is more important to them than any easy, ill-gotten money. We don't actually see them deliver the bust to Big Mac. It just cuts right to the middle of the promised poker game. For all the build-up about how dangerous and difficult the heist would be, They pulled it off with very minimal fuss. While the game is going on, the kid sits back and reads, which is pretty cute. The kid actually rarely plays cards, it's almost always just Hannibal. Hannibal wins via a straight versus a pair, but Big Mac cites a rule of Hoyle that says neither a straight nor a flush is played in stud poker unless it is declared before the beginning of the game. Now, I was gonna say that this is our first big Maverick connection, but that would be a lie. You see, in my ignorance, I neglected to tell you all something from the pilot. I called the guys at the saloon during the walk-off scene bullies or just the guys from the saloon. But they did have names. Shields and Kane. Yes, happy 4th. We're all very happy. These names are used in the Maverick episode The Quick and the Dead. That episode was written by Douglas Hayes, who, if you'll recall, co-wrote the pilot with Glenn A. Larson. I am deeply sorry that I didn't realize at the time I had recorded the first episode that there was this connection. But it puts me in good company, right? Like the Alias Smith & Joan pilot itself, I too failed in my first episode. So, as I was saying, this is our second big connection with Maverick. This obscure Hoyle rule about flushes and straights was taken from the Maverick episode, according to Hoyle, in which a woman uses it to beat Maverick. I've watched that episode, and the woman who pulls the trick is sure to mention at the beginning that they're playing according to Hoyle. Since we don't see the beginning of the game in the McCreedy bus, we can only assume that Big Mac did the same. Plus, the woman in Maverick says that only a woman could get away with that trick, so I guess by the time this episode aired, Huggins had changed his mind on that. And the straight flush rule is a real rule from Hoyle's Book of Games, 1876 edition. The writer was a lawyer named Edmund Hoyle who lived from about 1672 to 1769. In addition to law, he was a technical writer for over 600 games of skill and chance, like chess, backgammon, and something called whist? I have no idea what whist is or how you play it, but apparently he codified the rules of that game, and it's sometimes known as the English National Card Game. And the phrase, according to Hoyle, was actually a popular phrase. Saying all that to say this, Big Mac cheated, and he knows it. His friend Peterson, the banker, finds this hysterically funny. The boys leave the game in defeat. Oh, by the way, throughout the story, they keep cutting back to the sheriff, going through his wanted posters to try and identify Hayes and Curry. Remember how Blake was a dirty tattletale? Anyway, Hayes and Curry are not leaving without a fight. They go to the bank and convince Peterson to loan them $20,000 so they can get back into the game. They go to Big Mac's for a rematch, but Big Mac tries to wiggle out of it because he knows the boys are smart and probably have something up their sleeve, especially now that he's used his one trick on them. Hayes offers him a bet of the full $20,000 that he can take a fresh deck and get 25 cards dealt to him and make 5 pat hands with those 25 cards. And from what I understand, this trick actually works, but honestly, I'm pretty dumb and super hot, so I don't know anything about cards. But from what I maybe possibly gathered, a pat hand is a hand that is unlikely to be improved by drawing cards. The hands in question are a flush, a straight, a full house, 4 of a kind, a straight flush, and a royal flush. Now, could I do that? No. I'm too hot to understand things like that. We've been over this. Luckily, Hayes was blessed with both looks and brain, so he pulls it off and wins their $20,000 back. They're really making up for his idiocy in the last episode. He's so smart and smooth here. This is the Hannibal Hayes I know and love. Silver-tongued and whip-smart. This trick is also from a Maverick episode called Rope of Cards. In that, they call it Maverick Solitaire. This trick will also come back in a later Alias Smith & Joan episode. And to give Peterson some credit, he finds Big Mac losing just as funny as he found Hayes and Curry losing. And Big Mac is actually a fairly good sport about this. He does say that now they're tied 1-1 and he wants a third shot to break the tie. Dude, just let it go. You are so rich. It doesn't matter. The boys get good and trashed to celebrate when they should have hightailed it out of town immediately. They get jumped by Armendariz' men and taken back to his ranch. And finally, 35 minutes into the episode, we meet Armendariz himself, and he interrogates them about where the bust is. He claims that it's true he did take the bust from Big Mac, but he was owed it due to Mac underhandedly taking some of his land and then selling it off. Based on their experience with Big Mac, they believe him. They confess to him that they did take the bus. Armendariz decides to let them go free because they didn't take anything else from the safe. He makes it very clear that that's the only reason he doesn't toss them in jail. You see? Being lawful pays off, kids. As they prepare to leave town, Big Mac stops them and threatens that he figures they're outlaws, and if they leave before giving him one more shot to win the money back, he'll tell the sheriff. This is something that will happen to them a lot, getting blackmailed into doing something that a guest character wants them to do. Reluctantly, they go back to Big Mac's poker table. This time, Mac makes the bet that he can cut the deck on the ace of spades on the first try. And he's such an asshole about it that he just stabs the knife through the deck, assuming the ace of spades is in there. But Hannibal is smarter. He palmed the ace of spades. That makes him the winner. This is the third Maverick connection in this episode. The exact same thing happens in the episode Comstock Conspiracy. 3 Mavericks in one Smith & Jones. But aside from the card stuff, the plot of all 3 of these Maverick episodes is nothing like the plot of the McCreedy bust. Peterson continues to find all of this hilarious. Unfortunately, just as our boys triumph, Armendariz and his men break in and steal the bus back. And you know what? Good for him! Big Mac doesn't deserve it! He's slimy! Armendariz also takes $40K from him to truly call it even. But sadly, that was now technically Hayes and the kids' money, so they're broke again. That is also something that's recurring on this show. They very rarely get paid. They decide enough is enough and pack their things. Big Mac tries to tempt them into trying to steal the bust again, but they won't bite. They're done with the whole affair. For now. Oh yes. Big Mac McCreedy and Ernesto Armendariz will be back. This feud is not over. Oh my god, the fireworks. At the very end, Big Mac does do one decent thing. The sheriff has finally figured out who they are just as their stage pulls away. And Big Mac covers for them by saying that, no, he's wrong. Curry is actually his nephew and Hayes is a friend of his. I think he just respects the fact that they were able to outsmart him. So we end on another synchronized movement by Pete and Ben as they cross their arms in unison. Adorable. I like this episode a lot, and I'm not the only one. It was one of Roy Huggins' favorites, and producer Joe Swirling said, quote, one of the best episodes of television that I think I ever had anything to do with, where they were getting one up on him all the time. Now, I don't like it that much. It's not in my top 10, but it is very fun and pretty clever. It shows off Hayes' brilliance, and the kid gets his moment with the gun at the beginning. The line of the episode definitely goes to Hayes this week. When he's asked what kind of work he and Curry do, he simply answers, any kind as long as it ain't permanent or hard on the back. I felt that in my soul. Does the episode go to Hayes or the kid this week? Definitely Hayes for his poker prowess, and he actually cracks a damn safe. Next time on Alias Smith & Jones, a woman owns a saloon? What? She can't do that! Also, my boyfriend, Pernell Roberts, shows up. Research for this episode comes from the wonderful book Alias Smith & Jones, The Story of Two Pretty Good Bad Men by Sandra K. Sagala and Joanne M. Bagwell. Information about Edmund Hoyle comes from the article A Tale of Two Hoyles and Two Phrases by Jeff Glorfield, published in Cosmos Magazine. Thanks for listening.